The horrific execution of the man who slept with Henry VIII's wife. They've called this a love story for centuries. But what kind of love begins with rape, survives on royal protection, and ends with a woman losing her head? This was never romance. It was a royal cover-up. And a queen had to die to keep it buried. Catherine Howard was executed for treason. That is the official charge history preserved. It is also the story people were taught to accept. But the charge explains very little. The version passed down for centuries reduces everything to a familiar moral lesson: a young queen, reckless and immoral, punished for adultery. It is a clean narrative. Convenient. It places responsibility where power prefers it, on the weakest figure in the room. While that story circulated, older crimes quietly disappeared from view. Catherine did not die because she betrayed her husband. She died because acknowledging the truth would have exposed something far more dangerous to the Tudor crown. Years before her execution, Thomas Culpeper, one of Henry VIII's most favored courtiers, had committed acts that should have ended in death. Those crimes were known. They were documented. And they were deliberately forgiven. Not out of mercy, but out of favoritism. When Catherine's downfall began, the court faced a choice. It could reopen old wounds, rape, murder, royal pardons granted in silence. Or it could rewrite the story. The second option was safer. A queen could be blamed. A courtier could be reframed as a tragic lover. And a king's judgment could remain unquestioned. This was not a miscarriage of justice. It was a managed one. Catherine's execution served multiple purposes at once. It erased inconvenient history. It protected a man the king had once shielded. And it preserved the illusion that royal authority had never failed. Her death closed the case without ever addressing its cause. History remembers Catherine as the guilty party. But the roles were reversed long before the axe fell. She was not executed because she was dangerous. She was executed because the truth was. At the center of this story stands Thomas Culpeper, a man whose rise at court followed no ordinary path. He was not powerful because of rank alone. He was powerful because he belonged to the inner circle of Henry VIII, the Privy Chamber. This was the space closest to the king's body and mind. Its members dressed him, guarded his bedchamber, shared his leisure, and learned his moods before anyone else did. In Tudor England, proximity to the king mattered more than law. Culpeper learned that lesson early. Favored, indulged, and repeatedly rewarded, he discovered that royal affection could neutralize consequences. Serious accusations did not end his career. They vanished. Protection replaced punishment. Access replaced accountability. Within this structure, Culpeper became untouchable, not because he was innocent, but because he was loved. At the far end of this same axis stood Catherine Howard. She entered the royal world as a teenager, already shaped by an upbringing where older men held authority and boundaries were poorly enforced. By the time she reached court, she had learned that resistance rarely brought protection, and silence was often safer than protest. When she became queen, her age and title did not shield her. They isolated her. The official narrative later labeled Catherine a seductress. But that label ignores the imbalance that defined every interaction around her. She was young. She was watched. She carried a past that others could weaponize. And she lived within a system where powerful men faced few restraints. This is how the axis functioned. The king at the top, absolute, unquestioned. The favored courtier beneath him, protected, emboldened. And below them, a young woman, exposed, blamed, and ultimately expendable. What followed was not an accident of passion. It was the predictable outcome of a structure that rewarded loyalty over justice and sacrificed the vulnerable to preserve authority. In the spring of 1540, far from courtly ceremony and royal spectacle, a crime took place in the countryside of Kent that should have ended a man's life. According to a contemporary letter written in 1542, referenced in the source material, Thomas Culpeper attacked the wife of a royal park keeper while she was walking through woodland near the hunting grounds. This was not a private scandal whispered long after the fact. It was reported at the time, in writing, by someone relaying what was known. The account is explicit about the nature of the assault without turning it into rumor. Culpeper was not alone. Several of his attendants were present, and the letter states that they acted on his orders, restraining the woman while the attack took place. This detail matters. It removes any possibility of misunderstanding or chance. What occurred was deliberate, organized, and carried out by a man accustomed to being obeyed. The woman escaped and raised an alarm. Her cries drew villagers, men who recognized her and understood what had happened. They attempted to apprehend Culpeper. This was a dangerous decision. He was not an ordinary criminal but a gentleman of the king's privy chamber, a man whose closeness to the crown was well known. Attempting to arrest him carried real risk. During that confrontation, one of the villagers was killed. The same letter reports that Culpeper committed a murder while resisting arrest. The language is plain. There is no embellishment, no attempt to soften the event. A man died while trying to stop him. By any standard of Tudor law, the sequence was clear. Sexual assault, the use of force, and the killing of a man attempting a lawful arrest, each of these crimes carried the death penalty. Together, they should have made the outcome unavoidable. Instead, the case disappeared. Court records show that proceedings were initiated. Bonds were posted. A court date was set. And then, at the critical moment, Culpeper did not appear. A royal attorney arrived in his place, carrying a warrant bearing the king's signet. The charges were dismissed. No trial followed. No sentence was carried out. This was not ignorance. It was intervention. Henry VIII personally authorized the dismissal. The most powerful man in England chose to protect one of his favorites from the consequences of crimes that were already known and documented. The law was not defeated by lack of evidence. It was overridden by affection. Historically, this moment is the foundation of everything that follows. It demonstrates that Culpeper's immunity was real, visible, and learned. He was shown, clearly, that there were limits to what he could do, and then those limits were removed. The crime did not vanish because it was forgotten. It vanished because it was inconvenient. And once a crime of this magnitude could be erased, the cost of erasing the truth later would only grow. After the charges in Kent were dismissed, Thomas Culpeper did not retreat into obscurity. He remained exactly where he was, inside the royal household, and his position only strengthened. Honors continued. Appointments followed. Land and income accumulated. The message from the crown was unmistakable, nothing essential had changed. This was not quiet neglect. It was active reward. Culpeper kept his place in the privy chamber, the most intimate space of Tudor power, where access mattered more than reputation. Estates seized during the dissolution of the monasteries were distributed generously. Offices brought money and influence. Each grant reinforced the same reality: royal favor did not merely forgive past actions, it erased them. For those watching from the edges of the court, the lesson was immediate and chilling. If Henry VIII chose to love you, the law could be bent, delayed, or dismissed entirely. Justice was not blind. It was selective. And its selectivity was visible. This created a climate of collective fear. Courtiers understood that accusations against a favored man were dangerous, not only to the accused but to anyone who spoke. Servants learned to look away. Officials learned to remain silent. Even knowledge became a liability. To know too much was to risk becoming the next problem that needed to be removed. Within this environment, women had no protection at all. The fate of the unnamed woman in Kent was already known to the court, even if her name was not. She had cried out. Men had intervened. One had died. And still, the perpetrator walked free and prospered. That outcome was not lost on anyone. For young women at court, maids, ladies-in-waiting, even queens, the implication was clear. If a powerful man decided to pursue you, resistance offered no guarantee of safety. Complaint offered even less. The system had demonstrated where it stood. Historically, this moment explains more than Culpeper's confidence. It explains the silence around him. The lack of witnesses later. The reluctance to challenge his version of events. Power did not merely shield him once, it reshaped behavior across the court. The most dangerous lesson of all was not that crimes could be forgiven. It was that they could be rewarded. And once that lesson was learned, the next tragedy was only a matter of time. Long before Catherine Howard ever entered a palace, her understanding of power had already been shaped. Not by politics or ceremony, but by childhood experiences in which authority belonged to older men and protection was absent. Catherine was raised not by her parents, but in the household of her step-grandmother, Agnes Howard, Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. On paper, it was a noble upbringing. In reality, it was chaotic. Dozens of young people lived together with minimal supervision. Privacy was scarce. Boundaries were poorly enforced. What mattered most was appearance and marriage prospects, not safety. Around the age of 13, Catherine was assaulted by her music teacher, Henry Knox. He was an adult. He held authority over her education and daily life. When this came to light later, no public action was taken to protect her. Knox was quietly dismissed. Catherine was reprimanded. The incident was treated not as abuse, but as a potential threat to her future value on the marriage market. A few years later, around 15, Catherine became involved with Francis Dereham, a secretary in the same household. Their relationship was later described in conflicting ways, sometimes as mutual, sometimes as coercive. What is not disputed is the imbalance. Dereham was older, confident, and embedded in a structure where men exercised control. Catherine's own later statements acknowledged physical involvement, but in a setting where refusal carried consequences and consent was never equal. Again, when the relationship was discovered, the response followed the same pattern. Dereham was sent away. Catherine was warned to be careful with her beauty. No one intervened on her behalf. No one asked whether she had been protected, or whether she had been able to refuse. The priority remained reputation, not well-being. From these experiences, Catherine learned a practical rule of survival. Men acted. Women absorbed the consequences. Silence prevented scandal. Speaking risked ruin. Authority did not correct itself. By the time she arrived at court, Catherine did not enter as a blank slate. She entered as someone already trained by experience. She knew that older men could take what they wanted. She knew that complaints led nowhere. And she knew that being blamed was often safer than being believed. Historically, this matters because it reframes everything that followed. Catherine's later actions cannot be separated from this early conditioning. The choices attributed to her were shaped by years in which choice had never meant protection. In Tudor England, power taught its lessons early. For Catherine Howard, the lesson was clear. Men had authority. Women endured it, quietly, if they wished to survive. By the time Thomas Culpeper turned his attention toward Catherine Howard, he did not approach her as an equal. He approached her as someone who already knew her weaknesses, because he knew her past. Court gossip moved quickly through the privy chamber. Culpeper was well aware of Catherine's earlier relationships, details that could destroy her if brought to light. In Tudor England, a queen accused of prior sexual experience faced not scandal, but death. Culpeper understood that risk clearly. And he understood something else just as well: knowledge itself was power. Witness testimony later made one point unmistakable. Catherine did not welcome his attention. She asked that he stop. She tried to create distance. At one moment, recorded in the investigations, her words captured the exhaustion beneath the situation. Will this never end? Those are not the words of a woman pursuing a secret romance. They are the words of someone under pressure, confronting a pursuit she cannot safely escape. Culpeper's position made refusal dangerous. He was not merely a courtier. He was the king's favorite. A man who could enter Henry VIII's bedchamber freely. A man who had already escaped consequences for far worse actions. Catherine understood the imbalance. Rejecting him outright carried risks she could calculate all too well: exposure, accusation, and a king's rage. The encounters that followed, arranged through intermediaries, behind locked doors, have often been framed as evidence of mutual desire. But the structure around them tells a different story. A young queen, isolated and compromised, faced a man who controlled silence. Each meeting reduced her options rather than expanded them. Compliance became a strategy, not a choice. Historically, this distinction matters. Predation does not always look violent in public records. Sometimes it appears as persistence. Access. Pressure applied by someone who knows the cost of refusal. Culpeper did not need force. He relied on fear, fear created by the very system that had already taught Catherine how easily women were blamed and how rarely men were punished. This was not a love affair hidden from the king. It was a campaign of leverage, conducted in the shadow of absolute power. Culpeper acted not as a lover, but as a man who believed himself untouchable. And Catherine responded not as a seductress, but as someone navigating a trap built long before she ever wore a crown. When the verdicts were delivered, the court presented them as justice finally done. In reality, the executions revealed something far more precise. Punishment in Tudor England followed status, not morality. Both Thomas Culpeper and Francis Dereham were convicted of treason. The charge was the same. The legal category was identical. Yet what followed could not have been more different. Culpeper, once the favored companion of Henry VIII, received what contemporaries recognized as mercy. His sentence was commuted to a swift beheading. It was a controlled death, carried out quickly, without prolonged public suffering. This reduction was not granted because his actions were less severe. It was granted because his relationship to the king still mattered, even at the moment of condemnation. Favor did not save his life, but it softened his end. Dereham received no such consideration. His punishment followed the full penalty prescribed for treason. The process was deliberately public and deliberately extreme, intended to serve as a warning. The contrast was unmistakable. One man was dispatched. The other was made an example. What makes this disparity especially revealing is timing. Dereham's relationship with Catherine occurred before she was queen, before she was even connected to Henry VIII. He could not have foreseen her elevation, nor could his actions be framed as a direct betrayal of the crown at the time they occurred. Culpeper, by contrast, pursued Catherine after her marriage to the king, when the stakes were highest and the danger unmistakable. And yet, Culpeper's death was the gentler one. The court's logic was never about who caused greater harm. It was about who embarrassed the king. Culpeper's crime became unforgivable only when it implicated royal dignity directly. Dereham, lacking protection and favor, absorbed the full weight of the law. Historically, this moment strips away any remaining illusion of impartial justice. The same charge produced radically different outcomes because the men stood at different distances from power. The law did not ask who was most dangerous, or who had inflicted the deepest harm. It asked who had been loved. This is why the executions matter. They show that even in death, hierarchy remained intact. Mercy flowed downward from the king, stopping precisely where affection ended. Justice was not blind. It knew exactly whom it was looking at. At the center of everything that followed is a woman history never bothered to name. She appears only once, briefly, in the surviving record, the wife of a royal park keeper in Kent. No title. No portrait. No testimony preserved in her own words. And yet, her experience exposes the true foundation of this entire tragedy. She was the victim of Thomas Culpeper's violence in 1540. Her suffering was not hidden at the time. She screamed. People heard her. Villagers intervened. One of them died trying to stop what was happening. The crime was known, documented, and serious enough to demand the harshest punishment Tudor law allowed. And still, nothing happened to Culpeper. The woman disappears from the record immediately after. We do not know her name. We do not know whether she recovered, whether she was blamed, whether her marriage survived, or whether she lived the rest of her life marked by fear. History offers her no justice and no closure. She is reduced to a footnote, useful only insofar as her existence explains later events. This absence is not accidental. In Tudor England, women like her did not matter politically. Her pain did not threaten the crown. Her body did not carry symbolic weight. Her trauma did not embarrass the king. Culpeper was not executed for what he did to her. He was not punished for rape. He was not punished for killing a man who tried to stop him. He was executed only years later, when his actions touched something the crown did care about, the reputation of Henry VIII. When the scandal reached into the royal marriage, the protection finally collapsed. Historically, this is the most uncomfortable truth in the story. Justice was never absent. It was selective. It waited until power itself felt exposed. The unnamed woman in Kent received no reckoning because her suffering did not threaten authority. Her silence in the record is not a gap. It is evidence. Evidence of who mattered. And who never did. When the sequence of royal decisions is laid out in order, a pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Violence was forgiven. Murder was dismissed. But embarrassment was not. The crown intervened decisively only when its own image was threatened. A man who committed rape and killed a villager was spared because he was favored. His crimes did not damage the monarchy. They occurred in the countryside, among people without power, and they could be erased quietly. The law bent without protest. The court remained silent. Everything changed only when the scandal reached the royal marriage. At that point, punishment arrived swiftly and publicly. Not because new harm had been done, but because the illusion of control was at risk. A queen's private life could destabilize the story the crown told about itself. And that story mattered more than any individual life. So the question history rarely asks must be asked now. Why were rape and murder survivable offenses, but reputational damage was not? Catherine Howard was executed for treason, yet her supposed crimes served a different function. It closed a narrative. It redirected blame. It prevented uncomfortable truths from resurfacing, truths about favoritism, protection, and failures of judgment at the highest level. This forces a second question, more uncomfortable than the first. What, exactly, did Catherine die for? And finally, the question that Tudor justice never confronted. Who deserves judgment in this story, a 19-year-old girl shaped by abuse and power imbalance, or Henry VIII, a king who repeatedly chose loyalty over justice and shielded a predator until that protection endangered his own image? History answered these questions once, with an axe. Whether that answer was just as the question it left behind. Catherine Howard was executed. Thomas Culpeper had once been protected. Those two facts sit side by side, and they explain everything. Power did not fail to see what was happening. It chose what to remember and what to erase. When violence occurred beyond the palace walls, it was forgiven. When a man died trying to stop it, the record was closed. The crown protected what served it, and ignored what did not. Only when the past threatened to surface, only when silence could no longer be maintained, did punishment finally arrive. Catherine did not die because she loved the wrong man. She died because her existence risked reopening a crime that had already been pardoned. Her execution simplified the story. It transformed a chain of favoritism, abuse, and deliberate blindness into a single, manageable sin. Blame was placed where it would cause the least damage. The system survived intact. Culpeper's death, too, was selective. He was not punished for rape. He was not punished for killing a man. He was punished for embarrassing the crown, years after the acts themselves had been forgiven. His execution did not correct injustice. It concealed it. This is the legacy of Tudor power. Not justice delayed, but justice redirected. Catherine Howard did not die for love. She died because a crime had been forgiven too early. And Culpeper did not die because of what he did. He died because, at last, what he did could no longer be hidden.